Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome.
We're being live streamed. So I'm going to start right on. I'm Jade Davis, and I have a tiny little voice today, so it doesn't sound like I'm shouting, but I am. I'm the director of the Futures Initiative. This is my first year at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. It's fabulous to be here. Today we're going to be talking about the pedagogy of quality, sort of answer to the idea of the pedagogy of the oppressed. But I want to talk a little bit, just very briefly, about our program, the Futures Initiative, and what we're trying to do. For those of you who don't know, we're partnering with an online organization called Haystack, which HASTAC stands for Humanities, Arts, Science, and Technology Alliance and Collaboratory. It's an online network that the National Science Foundation has said is the world's first and oldest academic social network. It existed before MySpace or Facebook or even the oldest science academic social network, NanoLab. This is going to be live streamed and be also sent out through the Haystack Network. Futures Initiative is dedicated to equity and innovation. Often when we talk about innovation, the emphasis is on Stanford, MIT, and the idea of innovation is technology. And the idea of innovation is not just ways of making education be as equitable as possible and reaching as many people as possible, and including social justice and equitable ways of changing and improving democracy, as well as new ways of delivering education. And we think that, in fact, the most equitable education is innovative, and the most innovative education is equitable. One thing we're specifically talking about today is ways that the actual classroom embodies many of the least equitable practices of society. There's lots and lots of qualitative and quantitative research on this. We may need to close that door. Yeah. The classroom itself can embody the least equitable aspects of society. There's been lots of qualitative and quantitative research on such things as who speaks in class, who sits at the front of the class, who sits at the back of the class, who seems to be paying attention, who isn't paying attention. And those things correlate so strongly with race, with gender, with class, with linguistic capability, and with physical ability and cognitive abilities as well. And many of those things are very much structured into the physical layout of the classroom, the architecture of the classroom, but also the architecture of who's standing at the front of the classroom, how you're graded, what the systems of merit are that are built into the classroom to begin with, how universities are ranked by selectivity rather than by success and student success, how we measure student success, what Lonnie Guinier calls the tyranny of meritocracy. There's a whole constellation of things that are built in. But today we want to look specifically at the classroom, because often when we talk about social justice, the issues are so enormous and theoretical, it's hard to even imagine what our intervention can be. A classroom is something that we can change tomorrow. And one of the things we'll be talking about are some very simple techniques that you can do to actually make a classroom to structure equality in the structural inequality of the classroom tomorrow in a classroom. So I'm going to turn this over to Katina Rogers, who's going to talk next, and then we're going to start with some really basic, simple techniques that people have developed for structuring equality in the classroom. And then we would love to have it open to the floor for other people who have found ways of structuring equality. Andrew Casey, we've invited to talk about universal design and his work in disability studies, and specifically about things about restructuring the classroom with ability and success, as opposed to failure and disability in mind in the classroom, and what that looks like. What it looks like to really think of the classroom as a space where you might be able to model a better idea of democracy and social justice, instead of replicating inequality. and social injustice. So, and our hashtag today is Fight for Edu. And we'll be taking questions from people on the Twitter stream. I'm not sure if anybody is starting to work already to get some activity on the Twitter stream or if we have anything going on, but if we do, we'll be putting questions in. We also, you're going to talk about that, right?
Yep.
I'll shut up.
Thanks, Kathy. Thank you all so much for being here. We had actually no idea that this many of you would be interested in coming to talk with us today, and so we had a last-minute room change to accommodate everybody, which is really exciting for us. We couldn't be happier that this topic resonates with people and that so many people want to come together while they're all busy with the beginning of the semester to talk about this with us. Kathy mentioned the architecture of spaces and the ways that projects equality or inequality, and we're actually feeling kind of self-conscious about that right now. We would very much prefer not to be speaking from a podium at the front of the room, but we're working within the constraints that we have. So we'll do as much as we can throughout the session to turn this over to you so that we can hear all of your voices and all of your ideas for what to do in the classroom. We have an entire workshop series that is starting with today's workshop and then going forward throughout the rest of the year. The theme for the workshop is the university worth fighting for. We think that there's such a broad range of topics that are going to fit into this overall idea of what it is that we want out of our educational spaces, how we want to be teaching and learning and working with students and working with our colleagues to create a space for education that resonates with our underlying beliefs. So the series is designed to tie student-centered and engaged pedagogical practices to institutional change and social justice, with a particular focus on race, gender, diversity, equity, and inequality. To talk about those topics, we're going to be focusing on a different theme each month. This month's theme is specifically on pedagogy. Our other topics will include mentoring, peer mentoring, the importance of humanities for all students, regardless of their home discipline, career paths, libraries and presses, assessment, and teaching as social justice. So those are some things that you can look forward to throughout the year. All of this is up on our website at futuresinitiative.org if you want the full schedule and details. In addition to the workshops that we'll be hosting on-site at the Graduate Center and streaming online on the web, each workshop is also going to be paired with an online reading group that's hosted on Haystack. This is a space where it's student-led. Each month will be hosted by a different student. This month is hosted by Danica. She's got a terrific and provocative post up that will be open to your comments and discussion for another couple of weeks. This will be a space where students can go a little bit deeper, particularly into the research and theory behind each topic. In our workshops, we'll try to keep a really practice focus, and the online space can be more dedicated to readings and research. A link to that space is available on the agenda for today's session, which if you're here in person, you've got one in front of you. And a link to that agenda is also available at bit.ly/fightforedu-equality. So for the structure for today, we have quite a lot of people here, and we would love to hear from as many of you as possible. With that in mind, when we do open up the floor to hear from everybody, about your favorite pedagogical practices, we're going to ask that you limit your response and your comments to just a couple of minutes. This in itself is a way that we can help to establish equality in a space like this by ensuring that people can cede the floor to other voices and that everybody can be heard if they wish to be. You're also welcome, as Kathy mentioned, to participate on Twitter at the Fight for EDU hashtag. Or by adding your contributions directly to the Google Doc agenda. Again, the link is available on that agenda itself. There's a space for you to add your own favorite pedagogical techniques. So we hope that by the end of the session, we'll have a really nice resource bank, both from people here in the room and from people who might be tuning in online. So we'll be hearing from 3 people first, and then we'll open it up to everybody. Kathy first is going to talk a little bit about a couple of pedagogical techniques that she has had great success with, and then Danica Savanik is going to be joining us for a few minutes. Danica is a Futures Initiative Fellow and a graduate student in the English department. And then we'll be hearing from Andrew Lucchesi, who will be speaking about universal design. So Kathy, if you want to start for a few minutes.
Great. And we have somebody recording on the Google Doc too, recording techniques?
Yes.
Yeah. So if you have any classroom techniques that you stand up and tell us about, we'll be recording those on the Google Doc as well and sharing that publicly later so everybody can leave with an arsenal of techniques to use in the classroom. I use a lot of crazy techniques in my classroom to try to explode the notion of standing up here talking to a class. I don't usually do that in my classes. We're talking to a camera, so as well as to a room, so that's why we're doing this. But one thing I like to do in my classrooms, I often have my students write a class constitution. I don't like to do that from scratch. So in one class, we used the preamble to the U.S. Constitution. We've used preambles to different world constitutions as our starting place, and we've also used the Mozilla Manifesto, the open source credo for the Mozilla Foundation. And literally, I'd put that on a Google Doc and leave the room and have students engage with it and think about if they were going to take that document as their starting point and think about how they could make a collective community agreement for how they wanted to conduct themselves in the classroom and what the expectations would be for the whole semester, how they would change that to account for what they would do in the class. And it's quite an amazing process. I've never done it with more than 35 students, but I have done it with 35 students. It's quite an amazing process to have students collectively decide on things like, do they want laptops in the classroom? Do they want people coming in late? How do they want it? How do they feel about plagiarized work in the classroom? How do they feel about collaborative work? And such things as what is their goal for the class? What do they want accomplished? What kind of grading system do they want? And I've got other ways that I typically do contract grading and peer grading in my classes. But they also talk about the broadest goals of the class. What are the goals they want beyond the class? But to have students work from a document to their own highest aspirations for a class. Jade, I hope you don't mind if I embarrass you on this. Jade Davis is a recently defended doctoral student from the University of North Carolina who is now the Associate Director of, I'm not going to get it right again,
Digital learning projects.
Digital learning projects at LaGuardia Community College. He's just joined our Kini system in June, and was a student in a number of the craziest classes I taught when I was still in the research triangle. And in one of them, the students decided they didn't want to write term papers or research papers or take tests. They wanted to write a book together on peer learning. And their constitution basically wrote the terms of engagement to write an entire book. And there were only 8 students in the class. And one of the terms was that that they would come back, that they would turn in their chapters by the last day of class, or they would all fail. I could not go along with that. That was a little crazy. But that they were a little willing to stake that is pretty remarkable. And they did that when I was out of the room. That was entirely their collective agreement across 3 different universities that they decided on. A technique I learned, this is completely different, a technique I do in every class and in every lecture, although I'm not going to do it today, but I've done this with 6,000 people in the Philadelphia 76ers auditorium, a convention of high school teachers. Is a technique I learned from second grade teachers, but they also do it in medical schools. It's called Think, Pair, Share. How many people know about Think, Pair, Share? So you're all old-timers in this. Okay. Think, Pair, Share is something I like to do it in the most ritualized fashion. I think it's really important. I hand out index cards. I come up with a topic, and I'll say, take 90 seconds, and I literally set a timer, and say, write the 3 most important things you could think of for student-engaged learning. 90 seconds. People write for 90 seconds, stop. Pair up with somebody else. Take turns, and I find this extremely important. Take turns. One of you read out loud, other person listen. Then you shut up, the other person read out loud. While you listen to each of the things on the card, that's also 90 seconds. Then another 90 seconds to decide on the most important thing from the 2 cards, and then read that to the group. And I like to do a third part of that, which is to then share it with the world. It changes everything in the classroom. I typically do that once, twice, sometimes 3 times in the course of a class. It means the introvert has as much of a voice as the extrovert. It takes away the paralysis of having an idea and then forgetting the idea because you literally read what's written down. There's some magic that happens in that. It means that everybody has some moment of discussion and reflection. There's something about having a moment where you can write something down first that's incredible, and each person at some point gets to hear their own voice. the studies on where people go in with clickers into classrooms is most professors think they have 100% participation when they have 20% participation. That's pretty pathetic. With Think, Pair, Share, you have 100. You create a system of equality that makes 100% participation, and the quiet person doesn't have to be out there with the exhibitionist in a situation. Because the same kinds of people have done studies that show public speaking is what students fear more than death, right? I mean, the old Seinfeld joke turns out in study after study to be actually people's biggest fear. So Think, Pair, Share is also a way of making a bridge across that great fear, so that the A student is not the most exhibitionist student in the class. And you don't find out only in the final exam that your smartest student was a student who never said anything, which is a cultural, a gender, all kinds of things. Those are my two favorite techniques for today.
Perfect.
Second?
Danica, yes.
So keep I sit.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Can everyone hear
Do we
okay?
need there isn't even a mic. Yeah.
No, just
Can we,
like-
well, the live stream, you better stand up, because otherwise,
Okay.
does that matter? It doesn't matter?
No, but you can say
No,
it.
it doesn't matter.
Thanks.
Oh, does it matter for the room? Can you see? Okay, great.
Okay, I'll just project. So I have 4 things, which I think I can get through pretty quickly. The first 2 come from sort of more traditional activist spaces, in particular the Free University of New York City, which emerged from the Occupy Wall Street movement. And the first one is really quick and easy, and it's the idea that you would go around the room and have everyone identify their preferred gender pronouns as a way of including or of creating a more inclusive space on the first day of class. The second one is called progressive stack, or the idea of taking stack. And this one's particularly effective in a classroom that has a lot of people with a lot of things to say and a lot of participation. And when you take stack, there's somebody at the front of the classroom, somebody sitting in the class who's responsible for taking down the names of the people who want to participate. So if a question is asked, the students who want to participate will raise their hand, and the person in charge of taking stack will make eye contact, let each person know, okay, I've got your name, I've written it down, and that creates an order for participation. And what progressive stack does is it prioritizes voices that have been most marginalized and excluded. So if you have, women and people of color who have raised their hands and said that they want to speak, they can get bumped up to the front, to the top of the list, and then some of the voices that get heard more often, they come afterwards in the remaining time. So this is something that we tried in Kathy's class, and that I look forward to trying in my upcoming classes with undergraduates. It's something that I'm always sort of doing internally, but also you could consider having a student be responsible for taking stack and having a conversation about who historically has gotten to participate in conversations in certain spaces. The third one has to do with what Kathy was just saying about creating a classroom in which there's 100% participation. And this is a technique that we learned from Samuel Delaney. There's a really quick 4-minute video that's linked to on the post. It's called The Polymath. And in that video, Delaney describes the problem of posing a question to the class, something that every single student knows the answer to, and getting silence, right? Getting no responses, nobody's raising their hand. And so what he does is he flips the dynamics of the classroom by having every single student raise their hand. And then what he does is he goes around, he'll start by calling on one student, and that student can either answer the question, say, I don't understand the question, they can say, I didn't do the reading, or they can say, you know what, Professor Delaney, I don't really know the answer, but I would love to hear what Michelle has to say. And in doing so, that passes the participation on to a different student, and it creates a sense that students are integral to creating the scene of teaching and learning, right? It's not just something that they walk into, can kind of slouch and sit around and just watch as the teacher performs and the learning magically happens. Instead, it teaches them that they all have to, be there to participate and create the learning environment. So I tried this in my class, and it's uncomfortable, and students say it's awkward, but there's something about the physical act of having to raise your hand, especially if you've had to teach at 7:45 in the morning, like I have, right? It gets the blood flowing, it makes conversation happen, in addition to Think, Pair, Share, which is really successful. And then the last one, this is a little bit more high stakes, is student-designed evaluations and rubrics, which I really like doing at the end of the semester. So instead of me evaluating their work, I have them take ownership over the means of assessment, and I pass out blank rubrics, and they all get to decide what the different categories will be that they're evaluated on for those final projects. And then we come up with as a class, we sort of aggregate all of those into one rubric. And then the students are in charge of evaluating each other's final assignments. So they have to provide evidence for every score, every category that they give. And without fail, they grade each other much more harshly than I would ever. And so it's a way for them to take ownership over their learning process, and also, again, to teach that they are integral to producing the scene of teaching and learning. It's not just something passive that you come to consume. So those are my 4 little things. You can read more about them online.
Terrific. Danica, thank you so much. Andrew, if you wouldn't mind coming up here just so that the live stream can capture you too. Thanks.
Hey everyone. I'm really excited that I was asked to come and talk. Danica and I were both involved in a new teaching workshop where we talked about our work. I talked about universal design and how it applies to the classroom. So just very quickly, the idea of universal design is planning from the onset the widest possible range of users for an object or in a space. And within the classroom, what that often comes down to is conceiving multiple ways for engagement from every activity that you do. And there's so many aspects of teaching where we think one size fits all. And I'm going to address some of the most challenging places where we have a one size fits all mentality. And where it's most damaging to students who might have disabilities, but really and truly students in public higher education generally. And by those, I mean attendance and participation. These are the aspects that I think we have the fewest sort of automatic ideas for how to get around, but they're the aspects that tend to be the most disabling parts of our curriculum. So we've already heard lots of different ways for participation. One practice that I do every semester, and it occurs to me some of these are practices people will have to wait till next semester to implement, but some of them for people especially who start teaching on Monday, maybe you'll get there. Students come into the room with a deep knowledge of how they learn and how they have not learned in the past. If they come in with known learning disabilities, then they may be able to tell you about those, but if not, it's a situation where facilitating self-expression is essential. So every semester, I teach writing. It usually starts with some kind of diagnostic piece of writing, this awful medical term for the first piece of writing that students turn in. My diagnostic is always a letter to me about how they have learned best in the past and how they have failed in classes in the past and what those classroom environments are like. I make it a graded assignment because I believe that the good processes, the processes of self-understanding need to be rewarded in an environment like this. So that's the first thing that I recommend as a trick. It's simply an easy assignment. Students write a letter about their learning experiences, what they get best out of classes. I also use grading contracts in all of my classes. Particularly, there is an easy and available grading contract model by Danielowitz and Elbow from 2009. It's completely accessible online in PDF format, both the contract itself and an article explaining sort of why the contract works. My first couple of days of class are always about what are the habits that we're going to work on in this semester, what are the skills we're going to work on, and it's under the assumption that their jobs in this contract is to labor with effort. Their job is not to show expertise. That's not what they're graded on. So it's a way to shift the stakes of the work that we're doing together. And then the other aspect that I want to talk about is participation. The traditional model of participation grade, of course, is who talks in class gets a check and gets some points, and who doesn't talk in class loses that and misses out on those points. That's sort of the traditional model. I think it's important to develop another channel for participation, and this is a standard disability studies or disability practice that's used at the Disability Studies Society, which is building another avenue in. I distribute note cards to my students. I require them to buy a pack of note cards. 100 of them cost $1, which is much less than my textbooks or anyone's textbooks tend to cost. So simply having another channel where it's understood, they turn in a question every class, whether that's a question they want to voice out loud, or that's a question they just want to show me, or that's a question that they're just going to think about some. That's their attendance and their participation grade, is through this note card that maybe the other students don't hear about, but maybe that's not the way that student participates in class. It's about building in multiplicity and plurality. Twitter offers another avenue, which has its own accessibility issues built in, but Twitter can also provide a back channel for conversation where students can ask questions and engage in that way. So that's just what I want to throw out as my thinking on universal design and some approachable ways to build it into the classroom.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Andrew. That's so helpful. At this point, we would love to turn it over to you. That could look at like a few different things. We would be happy for you all to ask questions of the people who have spoken so far. But what we would really love is if you have ideas of your own. I know we haven't asked you to come prepared with anything that you would like to present, but I'm sure that given your interest in the topic and the fact that you're probably all busy either writing syllabi right now or have just completed writing a syllabus for the semester, we would love to hear some of the things that you're including in your own classrooms. I would ask, I hope this doesn't prevent anyone from coming up here, but if you're able to come up and share your ideas from the front of the room just so that the live stream folks can hear you, and so that everybody in the room can see you, I think that would be great. If that makes you uncomfortable for whatever reason, you can certainly stay where you are, and we'll just make sure to relay your ideas to the people at home. Yeah, sure. Anna, could you come up?
Okay.
And if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself briefly so that people know who you are, that would be great. Thank you.
I haven't prepared anything, so this is an improvisation. Hi, my name is Anna Statsenko. So because it's such...
Could you mention your department just for people?
Oh, it's
Yeah,
psychology here and urban education. But because those topics are so dear to me, so I wanted to say a few things. So I think to support this kind of pedagogy, it's also very important to invite students to consider that there are no ready-made answers to any of the things they will be learning about. So this is the way also to evoke agency and to draw on their agency so that they know they won't read things that are set in stone and clear to everybody and done with. Because none of the things they will learn actually is of this kind. There are no ready-made answers to any of the questions. Although the textbooks are written typically with a very different voice of here are the answers to the questions. And if students have a kind of a mindset that the answers are there, that puts them already in a passive position. So it's a very important epistemic stance of coming to the classroom and together discussing things that are open-ended, as they really are, actually. So I wanted to share this.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and these techniques are precisely structured in order to counteract that. So they're basically deconstructive techniques. They're assuming that students come with at least 12, if not 20 years of experience in being told there are answers.
Exactly.
And this structures a situation where the answers are the question.
So I think the suggestion is to make it very explicit.
It's very good, thank you.
Okay, that's a technique.
Terrific, thank you.
Thank you.
Evan, yeah. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Evan Mishula. I'm a graduate student and a substitute lecturer in computer science at John Jay. And classroom management is one of the issues that graduate students really have to confront, particularly when they're trying to encourage more and different voices. And so I thought that the one thing I wanted to get out there is managing disruptive students, because too often if we don't plan for a multiplicity of levels of participation, one student who knows all the answers or maybe has already familiarized themselves with the material will dominate. And that actually sets a lot of research has shown that sets back other kids in the class almost a full year. So an organization that I participate in called Software Carpentry has a policy of limiting the number of comments per student per class to 3, so that people can't just run out the clock trying to get participation points. So that's all I wanted to say.
That's
Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. Okay. And if you want to respond, whether Kathy or Danica or anyone in the room. Oh, sorry. Yes, please.
So I can share something that I learned to do when I was a teacher millions of years ago. I'm sorry, I'm Ophelia Garcia, I'm from the Urban Education Program. This is still the way that I teach. I still teach my doctoral students this way. I learned it from Prospect Archives, Pat Carini's work. I call it collaborative descriptive inquiry because I've adapted it. And the way we do it is after a session in which they've all read, we come together. I lead. But I am not the voice of the class. We go around the room. Everybody has to share something that was meaningful to them from the reading, either because of their own experience or because of something they have read or because there's something that they have experienced in the world. And we take turns, one at a time. It is a disciplined process. You have an opportunity to pass. You can, pass, but you do have your space. And this is a way of putting all our diverse voices alongside each other, by the way, in different languages if we want to, so that it is completely inclusive. Everybody has a space. It is about showing the rough edges of work, not complete. It's not show and tell. It's about showing rough edges of work. And it's also about believing that human capacity is widely distributed. So we all have something to learn from each other, and we have to question what is called expert knowledge. It's a participatory way.
Thank you. I love that idea of showing the rough edges of work.
John, please.
Good point. Sorry.
And I believe we're capturing all of this on a document, on a collective document that we'll be able to put up and share with everybody today.
Hi, I'm Donald Roth. I'm in anthropology. This is not a technique, but it's an issue, one or two issues which I
Yes,
encounter.
please.
First of all, in graduate education, often you have a class with students from different social backgrounds, origins, and there's a real confidence problem in some students. And I don't know, I just raise this as an issue to discuss, is how you handle this and how you, it's a tricky thing because you don't want to discourage students who are bright and so on, but you also want to encourage students, obviously, who feel reticent because, they haven't been to an Ivy League school before and all that. So that's one issue. The other thing I wanted to mention is a point I made to Kathy before, which is to convey to students, I think this is very important at college level, to convey to students from a low-income background the distinctive thing which they possess, which they bring to the table, which others do not have. Others from an upper income background do not have. I think this is very important for students to grasp that they have a quality which they are bringing to the process, which is distinctive to their origins and experiences, right? And to bring this forward. And this is, of course, the experience of life at a level which is not publicly articulated and captured sufficiently in the voice which is defining public policies and all those things. So I just thought I'd throw that into the pot to bring that out to people, for people to recognize that they're not being done a favor, right? But there's an essential part of cultural and political life, right, which they possess, which is vital that it be brought forward. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Yeah, I love that, Don. You and I have talked about that before. Because, in fact, one of the reasons we called this Pedagogy of Equality, playing off the Freire pedagogy of the oppressed, is I think there are exactly things that people who supposedly are put in the position of the victim and the oppressed possess that are far more vast in their riches and in their knowledge and experience and insight that are just completely invisible within certain hierarchies and standardization of knowledge, often that don't come out in standardized testing or in merit systems, but do come out in a kind of brilliance, often at with the kind of research that we ask our students to do. But we don't value that nearly enough. So structuring a situation where that is valued is really important, and it requires a transvaluation of values to make that the case. It's very important. Thank you.
I feel like I'm not appropriately dressed to stand. My name is Janet Ruther. I'm a PhD student in the theater program and an adjunct lecturer and graduate teaching fellow at Blue College. And piggybacking off that last statement, I think one of the most important things that I do as an educator is to come out over and over again to my students in multiple different ways. As someone who grew up on public assistance, as someone who is still a student myself and still in classwork, having to write my own papers and do my own homework, as someone who travels 45 minutes or more, depending on the trains, to get to my classroom every day, as someone who pulls late nights doing the work to grade them as well as doing my own work. And not to say that, right, like I have the same experiences as them, also coming out as a white person. I know that sounds like a stupid thing to say, right? But when all of my Asian students give me nicknames, I'm happy to call them what they want to be called if it's what they really want, but I want to communicate to them that if they want to be called their real name, I'll work on getting it right, and I understand that as a monolingual American white person, right, I'm at a disadvantage in that actually, and I need them to help educate me. So I think that's really, really important. The other thing I wanted to say, which is I guess similar to the Think, Pair, Share, although I had never heard that done in quite the same way before, surprisingly, I do a listening practice called 3-2-1, where one person speaks for 3 minutes, and the other person can, nod and be vigorous but not speak. And then for 2 minutes, they respond, they say what they think they heard, and they also can ask questions or ask for clarification. And then for 1 more minute, the first student responds back and can correct the student who's responding to them or answer their questions, go deeper, and then they switch roles.
Very great.
Thank
great.
you. Yeah,
That's great.
yes, please.
Sometimes these don't sound like rocket science, but I swear they are rocket science. I mean, they're really, really interesting. I'm
Steve Bauman. I'm Faculty of Nursing at Hunter and here at the PhD program in Kini. A week ago today I was teaching in Haiti, a GNP course, geriatric nurse practitioner course in Haiti, which I taught at Hunter for several times. And here I was faced with a challenge. It was the first time the MP program is in Haiti, and we helped bring that from New York. So I had some questions for this group from this, and I'm very interested in success and retention of these students in the new program. So one of the things the tips that work, I did use, so I knew the primary language was Haitian Creole, which I have no affluence in. I have some French and English. So I sent the materials in French and English in advance, and I had Google Translate going. I had students read, I had the English paper copies for everybody. I had students read the French because they preferred French, but then I would use Google Translate. So if they had a question, I would put it in Google Translate. It had both the English and French, which was good. The other positive thing I can observe is that I was the first probably male nursing instructor the male students had, so they were very engaged. Female students were less. I don't think they knew how to relate to a male nursing instructor in that country because there are none. So those are the positive things. But I do have, we'd like to ask you, so I came back to Hunter and I said, why don't we do things in multi-language in the classroom concurrently? We could do that. I have Babylon, it's another translation material. Software for $119, you can access that and translate whole chapters of content. So if anybody had thoughts on that, I know there's political issues of that, but I think this group will appreciate the value of having more than one language in a classroom. And do we actually even try to figure out if language was a barrier and to what degree? So that if anybody can give me feedback on that, I'd be happy.
You two are teaching a class this semester on language and multi. Maybe you could talk
a lot
about
that.
Please talk about what you're going to be teaching. Yeah, sure. It'd be great.
Well, I mean, we have been working with a pedagogy that we call translanguaging pedagogy, where, of course, what we do is we have the text in whatever language is the language of instruction, but you provide either translated text or you provide students the possibility to discuss the text in the language that they feel comfortable with, because after all, that's how knowledge is acquired. And there is no reason why, if we're really teaching and evaluating and assessing content, why you cannot let students use their own language resources to make meaning of the text. So why we don't use it in CUNY, I don't understand, because we are really very rich linguistically and we should be able to use our resources. But I can tell you a little bit, I can give you guides to translanguaging that we have developed in our project.
Thank you.
Might be useful.
That's fantastic, thank you.
We have Tim next. I'm taking staff, by the way, so just flag
thank
that.
It's wonderful.
Desirous of speaking.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Timothy Griffiths. I teach English at Brooklyn College and I'm a PhD student here. This actually dovetails a little bit off what Don was saying a few minutes ago. There are two ways in which I actually have begun to use music a lot in my class. It sounds a little corny at first, but so it's having to do with the roll call and having to do with access to discourse. So as Don was saying a second ago, students, I think, have kind of a purchase on issues, especially CUNY students, that I think a lot of times think we know a lot about, but they know in a way just as much as us, or they know differently that issue than we do. And sometimes cultural theory, and I think I'm building a little bit off of Barbara Christian's work or Antonio Gramsci here, obfuscates knowledge, sometimes purposefully so. And so what I do is every time that we have like a particularly kind of like heady text or opaque text, what I try to do is pair it up with a song. And often the song acts usually either as a mnemonic device or as a different access point into the piece. So for instance, I taught counter-identification in a class last semester and I used the Beach Boys song, That's Not Me. And that's just like one small example. Sometimes I use poems and things like that too. So if a student is more comfortable working in a different medium for expressing an idea, such as poetry or a song or something like that, they can work back to the concept that way. And I think that's useful in social sciences, humanities, a number of different disciplines. The second way in which I use music, it has to do with roll call. So throughout the semester, I have a collaborative Spotify playlist with my class, and I stock it with a bunch of songs beforehand that are paired up with readings throughout the semester. And then I ask them to contribute more. Often when students are presenting a material, they're also asked to contribute a song that has to do with the material. Every class, I start playing music rather than jumping right into roll call. And the reason I do this is because in Fred Moten and Stefano Harney's The Undercommons, Moten asked this question, and Moten and Harney asked this question, what would happen if we didn't call the class to order? Which is always this kind of like hailing people into discourse. So it always sort of purposefully starts class, like maybe a couple minutes late, but often I'll do a silent attendance, because you have to do attendance, right? Or you get in trouble. And I have songs playing while that happens. Sometimes one that's assigned for the day, sometimes one that a student has picked for that day. And then we sort of start the class more conversationally. So basically one that allows the students to put a bunch of new material on that maybe makes them more comfortable with some of the material. It doesn't give the class this stultified, like, hailing them into discourse kind of feel. And that's basically it.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Did you have a study? Sorry, who was next?
Oh, great.
Hi, my name is Rakita Masan, and I'm a theater practitioner, and I'm with Theater of Quest NYC. So we're a theater company that is dedicated to doing the Theater of the Oppressed techniques around the city with different troupes. And I guess applying it to traditional classrooms, I think the thing about breaking down hierarchy is really about breaking up the space. And being in traditional classrooms, teaching at Columbia, just the space, the physical space itself is kind of obtrusive. And there's a division of like, here's where the teacher space is, and here's where the student space is. And by doing some gathering everyone up in a circle and creating some gestures with voice and sound has been a way where people are immediately, the hierarchy's broken, and we're breaking up the chairs between teacher and participants, and everyone has to say their name and create a sound and a gesture with their name, and then everyone else in the circle mirrors it back. And so then everyone kind of takes each other's name on, and at the end of it, everyone comes into the circle and creates a sound and gesture from someone, reminiscent from someone else in the circle. And so from then on, immediately, everyone's voice and gesture is kind of resonating in the space. And if you can, every classroom, try to break up the space somehow differently. If you're setting the chairs in a different place, or let's work in this corner, so trying to just break up the space itself so that nobody's feeling comfortable, like, I can retreat in this corner, and then giving the participants from then on, ideas of how they would like to create the classroom in a different way.
Thank you.
Here, yep.
Hello, my name is Karina Macar. I'm an assistant professor at City College in the programs of bilingual education in TESOL, and I'll be co-teaching with Ophelia here this term a course on language policy, global language policy. I just wanted to share really quickly. I think it's important for students to see themselves in the syllabus, much like the manifesto, although I don't necessarily talk about the logistics, but I bring in a draft, and then I have them we go over the course and some of the expectations, but then I have them really think about what they want to get out of the course. Just one particular goal, personal goal, write a sentence about it. And then I take a picture. I really emphasize community as well. So I go back, I put the picture on the syllabus, and then I just transcribe each and every goal so that when we come back the following week, they have a new syllabus with all their goals and a picture, and that kind of just brings in the community aspect. And I also like to see themselves represented in the literature. So if there are readings that may not resonate with them, or they come from different places from all over the world, then I try and pull out some things that may be representative for them in this.
Do you take a picture of the students themselves?
Of the group of students.
And the group of students, and put that in the syllabus?
Right, they huddle all
Cool.
together, and then
Very cool.
they have a picture of themselves.
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Saha. I'm a PhD student at NYU, and I teach there as well, and I'm involved with GITP here at Kini. Just a couple of things talking about music. What I do sometimes in classes when there's activity that students are doing, I encourage students to play music in the background. Some students don't like it, some people do, then they kind of negotiate that and kind of creates that thing. Another thing I do is most of the work that we do in class is on a blog. So when we set up the blog, I don't set it up beforehand. I set it up in class, and I have everybody think of a name together. And there's often like silence, and then one person will come up with something, and then somebody else will disagree, and then that kind of disagreement always brings like communication in the group. So we come to a class name on our blog together, and I have people add each other on the blog if I can, which also kind of gives them ownership of their blog and each other. And the third thing I want to talk about was something that I think Andrew was talking about, using Twitter. And sometimes, some of the issues with Twitter being open and stuff like that, people aren't comfortable with it. So my friend from Twitter, Jane Circle, came up with a thing called Today's Meet, and it's todaysmeet.com, which is kind of like a Twitter, but it's you set it up, and you can set a time limit for when it's up. You can download the transcript if you want. So what I do is I set it up, and I don't look at it, and I tell students to do what they want on there. They don't have to sign up. You give them like a link. They go in there and they start talking to each other. They don't have to set up their own names. I mean, you can set what rules you want there, but it's kind of like an in-class Twitter that can exist and then go away, or stay longer if you want to.
Thanks, Saha.
What is it called now? Today's Meet? MEET?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to be put on stack?
Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm in the theater program here, and I have taught at Hunter, and this year I'm a writing fellow at School of Professional Studies. And I actually just have a question inspired by something Kathy said about making this this student constitution where she leaves the room. And so my question and fear about that kind of activity, which I really want to try, which is why I have this question, is how do we make that environment when it's the first day of class and then you're out of the room, how do we not make a constitution just written by the straight white men in the classroom like all constitutions are generally written by? How do we not use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house, to quote Lord?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, you have to structure certain things into it. So I always use a Google Doc so that you can see who's leaving the comments. And I'll usually say something like, everybody has to participate. So you have to I absolutely don't believe you can counter structural inequality by goodwill. The only way you can counteract structural inequality is by structured equality. So I sometimes coercively will structure equality into a situation. So I will say, okay, use the comment sections. There's a revision history, Google Docs, say the revision history. Everyone has to have an icon. Everyone has to be represented here. I want to see the debates. We're going to study the debates. That'll happen. But it was actually an undergraduate student who one time, I used to do it with me in the room, and it was an undergraduate who said, you're the parent when you're in the room. It's never, you are structuring inequality by staying in the room. You have to leave, and it's changed everything. Well, you were in the class last semester where Bill Kelly and I, right, the former president of the graduate student and I came into our first class and said, hello, welcome to the first class taught by the Futures Initiative, goodbye, and we left the class and gave them 45 minutes to plan the semester. But we structured the equality by having each segment, the 4 segments, on huge Post-it notes around the class, and said you had to each choose units of those segments and choose them. So that already made a structure to work from. I don't think you can make things happen from a position of nothing without some kind of foundational stuff taken care of. Like the scheduling, I always do really stupid, petty, to-the-minute work about scheduling before I let people go free. Because otherwise they waste all their time on scheduling and they never get to the free part. So I do that, the grunt work, the stuff that professors don't usually do is what I spend my time on before a class. And really do all that grunt work to arrange a situation of creativity later. But I do structure that in, where I just make that a requirement. Otherwise it doesn't happen. Otherwise 2 people take over and are bossy about everything. Yeah, no, it's you have to structure it. You just have to. We've got all the studies. I mean, Danica and I did a thing on gender bias in academia where all we did was did annotations of all the different studies of gender bias. It's shocking. They've been studied like 15 different studies. And in every case, the gender bias comes up over and over, no matter how you think you're countering it, unless you structure against it. And it's even more true for racial. It's as true for racial bias.
So we have Jade.
And while Jade's making her way up, we've got about 10 minutes left. So after Jade's contribution, I'd love to open the discussion more deliberately for questions. These presentations have been amazing and I think really eye-opening for all of us.
I'll be very short. I'm Jade Davis. I'm the Associate Director for Digital Learning Projects at LaGuardia Community College. One of the things that I do in my course is I try to make them project-based, and part of this is having workshop days in class. And the workshop days are important because those are the days where the students get together in groups to talk about their projects or the work that they're doing in the class. So it makes it so I'm not the primary audience, which is what I tell them every time they do it. But it also puts the students in groups where they're asking questions to each other. And then I go around and do in-class office hours. So everybody is able to speak to me either one-on-one or in the group so that they feel like if there's that question they're scared to ask in front of everybody because they have that fear of public speaking, there's a private time to do that. And afterwards, I generally have a good sense of what's happening in the classroom, where people are stuck, and then I can address the things that are common to the whole classroom space. But it allows the students to sort of feel empowered in the classroom to say, you know what, I'm confused or I'm lost or I don't know what's happening, but not outside of the classroom space. So it's not I have to come to office hours and be strange and show up at a time that's not inside the class. It makes it an okay thing to happen in the class.
Thank you, Jade.
Why don't we do a think fair share questions?
We have time? I don't know if we've got.
We probably don't have time.
Yeah.
If we had time, we would do a think, pair, share for questions, but we probably don't have time to do that. So we probably should just ask for questions. But it would be perfect. If this were a class, it would be perfect to do think, pair, share for final questions. So everyone had a chance to ask a question to somebody else.
Yeah, you certainly could write them down and slip them to us. Honestly. Or feel free to use Twitter as well if you're not comfortable speaking up in front of the group.
Questions? Any final questions before we convene? I think we've got 4 minutes.
Yes. Can you talk a little bit about the tension that one feels between content that one feels the students should be exposed to, and handing it over to the students. Can you talk a little bit about that tension?
The tension between, sorry.
The tension between being the expert who's teaching and the participant of a group.
Just to repeat the question in case the live stream didn't pick it up. The question is about the tension between being the expert in the group and turning it over to student participation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most complicated question in a classroom. And there's no real answer, because I think on the one hand, we all know, especially if you're in this room, you probably know that one of the worst ways of conveying expertise to somebody else is by telling them what you know, right? You know, that tells them what you know, but it doesn't help them become an expert. And I really believe that adage that you don't want to teach somebody math, you want to teach them how to be a mathematician. You know, if you really are conveying a field, you want them to embody expertise and become an expert. So there's some conveying of content, but there's even more a conveying of the ability to master content. And some of that, I think, has to be participatory and engaged and grappling with the material in a very, very individualistic way. At the same time, clearly we're having this conversation because we've each grappled with this question, and there is some meeting of expertise here. So there's some balancing of both of those things. One thing I like to do in classes also is I often ask students on the first day of class to write, and I've actually, the CEO of Cisco helped me come up with this when I did a workshop for Cisco executives at one point. I have people write on a card 3 things they think are going to really impede their learning in a situation that they feel are deficiencies, and then on the reverse of the card, write 3 things that they think they can help anybody with in the situation, and then I have, and this is what I learned from the Cisco CEO, have them write on Post-it notes around the room the 3 things they are really worried about that they think will impede their own learning, and then I have them walk silently around the room and look at all of the things people are afraid of that they're not going to master. And his thing was to have them take that in silence, because the thing you see is even the people that are the smartest people in the room, and these were all famous billionaire, right? I was the only person in the room who wasn't a billionaire, billionaire executives, seeing the fears that other people have. And then I have my students match up what they can do with what somebody else can't do and be learning partners. So at the very least, even when I'm lecturing, there's always some pair of I can't do and I can do that shows students that the expertise is not just me, but also in a resource in the room. Because I think students often in our classrooms, this kind of structure, miss the expertise that's in the room. They take advantage of the expertise of the professor, but then, especially on the graduate level, then they have to write a dissertation, and they have to somehow know from thin air how you become an expert, not how you hear an expert, but how you become one. And I think that ability to learn how to give your own expertise to somebody else, and how to assume your own expertise in the subject, and how to hear and gather somebody else's expertise is maybe as important as expertise itself. I don't know. I don't know if it's as important. I don't know what's important, content or learning how to capture content. The learning or learning how to learn. That's a very, that's one of the biggest questions in all learning. But there's, to me, maybe equally important. But some way of demonstrating that we are all have things that we are experts at, and we all have things we need experts to help us with. And it's not just the teacher that can supply that. And so a lot of those techniques are demonstrative. But that is the question. Mm-hmm. The other one all the time, which is paired with that, is coverage. What happens if I don't cover everything on the syllabus? And and the arbitrariness of what we think should be covered on the syllabus, but we fight to the death in faculty meetings over coverage, right? And how can we possibly be respectable and hold our heads in the world if we don't cover all of these subjects? Right? I mean, that's the most boring and horrible, bloody faculty meetings I've ever been in are on that subject, on that idea of coverage. So we defend it very hard.
I would also add that there's been so much research done on how students learn content and master content better if they have to teach it to one another rather than receiving it from the person who is standing at the front of the room. So I tried this past semester. I had students it's an English literature course, but for non-major students, it's one of the few humanities classes that a lot of them will take. and they were struggling with grammar and punctuation. And so I tried releasing the control. I wanted to be the one there, this is how you use a comma, like let's do this and get this right. And I had them go into groups and make presentations on and teach one another and correct, like become the master of using commas. And then they were the class resource on how to use commas, and they learned to correct each other's work. And they had to each give a presentation and be the ones to teach the rest of the class about grammar and punctuation. And I think it worked. I mean, like I was the one, reading their work at the end of the semester, and I think it worked about as effectively as when I make the worksheets and I hand them out. And instead, in this model, they made the worksheets, they made the PowerPoints, they stood up at the front of the classroom and had to become responsible for the content.
I think we've got time for one last question if anybody has something they'd like to ask.
Is it scary, or is it banal, or is it somewhere in between? I don't remember quite when I decided I just was going to leave the room on the first day of class and let my students make a syllabus. I think that was terrifying the first time I did it. I don't remember. Now it feels great. Now I love doing it. And it does become self-selective, where pretty soon you get students who know you're going to leave the room, or you're going to do some rug pull on them. Afterwards.
Just to add on to that, I've noticed that students are often the ones who are much more uncomfortable with you doing this sort of thing.
Totally.
Than you are. Say, for instance, like you have a very long silence in a room. Like I have come to feel like that's just fine. Like we have a long silence, we have a long silence. But students, I think, they seem to be the ones who are really uncomfortable with that sort of change. So yeah, I think it just goes to show like how commonplace so much of this is and how much work it takes to break it down. So.
Right, because if you're a college student, even if you're a bad college student, you're a success. You have succeeded for 12 years through this system of education, which is basically invented to teach farmers how to be factory workers. You've been groomed very well in this whole system of passivity. And suddenly then someone is telling you, no, you have to learn how to be an active participant in your own learning. And that can be pretty terrifying, especially now. I think more in the last 10 years with the insane emphasis on standardized testing and sort of accountability to which not just students but their teachers are held to in schools. That it's a really hard thing to make the break. And so often working on the level of students is making students feel that you're not pulling a fast one on them, or there's not going to be a trick at the end where they're really going to get in big trouble, or where they're really learning. I don't know if did your students feel like they were learning about commas when they were learning from one another?
They were. I mean, I needed to intervene, and we needed to have conversations about, why they were doing that, and when there were mistakes, we needed to sort of teach each other. But it was a lot more horizontal in that sense. But yeah, it wasn't completely relinquishing.
I feel I have to do a lot of what an educator would call metacognition, where I'm not just teaching, I'm teaching my students what they've learned. The old Borscht Belt joke, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. I do that all the time when I'm doing this kind of learning, because otherwise students don't realize they've learned something if it's not on the test. So there's a lot more of that constant reflection on what you've learned, how you've learned it, why you've learned it, that goes on, which is great for the world beyond school.
Well, thank you all so much. Oh, Anna, did you want to say something?
No, I just going back to the issue of expertise. If we really take seriously the point that there are no ready-made answers, then there are no experts either. So we should really leave aside the notion of expert. We should say we're all learning. We really, some of us have certain tools in certain areas, that's fine, but the notion of expert, who is the expert? And that's one thing. There is no such a thing, okay. And the other thing, of course, you started with democracy, the notion of democracy. That's the other thing that needs to be also problematized rather than taken for granted. That's where we don't have experts who really know what democracy is, because it does not yet exist. So okay, let's all explore what it can be really, where all people have equal voice and so on. Yes.
Thank you all so much for coming. This has been a great introduction. Thank you.
So our next workshop will be on peer mentoring, and that'll be on September 24th. We hope that you will join us for that as well. And in the meantime, please do take a look at Danica's post on Haystack and add your comments there. You all have been just so inspiring in your own techniques today. There may still be some coffee next door, so feel free to take a peek on your way out if you'd like something to drink. And we will hope to see you all in September. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.